friends, welcome to my channel 5 Minutes History. Today I bring you the infamous story of the British colonialism in India and the subsequent loot of the Indian resources done by the British colonists. We all know that during the age of discovery from 15th to 17th century, seafaring Europeans were competing each other for new colonies and in the process explored and conquered regions across the globe. They usually employed trade as the means to achieve their colonial ambitions. British, who were the major naval power of the time, also came to Indian shores disguised as traders. Growing and expanding on trade concessions and corrupt practices, they soon started interfering in political affairs of every Indian province, putting one ruler against another, and within no time established complete control over India. Thus began the economic drain of India that lasted for about 200 years. British East India Company and later British government sacked Indian states one by one and seized their wealth and resources. In 1757, when Company Governor Robert Clive overthrew Siraj-ud-Dowla, the Nawab of Bengal, by hatching a conspiracy with his army chief Mir Jafar, he claimed a fortune of £160,000 for himself, £500,000 for Company's army, and bribes of £24,000 for each member of the Company's committee, all from Bengal's treasury. During the sacking of Jhansi in 1858, British led by Governor-General Dalhousie carted away the entire valuable property of the state. Not a single useful thing was left with the people. Dalhousie was following the lofty precedent set 100 years earlier by Governor-Generals Robert Clive and Warren Hastings. During his trial in England on corruption charges, Clive had shamelessly said that considering the quantum of wealth he had seen in India, he was astounded at his own moderation at not taking more. Throughout the approximately 13,000 days of British rule in India, vessels sailed daily for Britain from ports all along the India's coasts. They were laden with incalculable quantities of wealth and other valuables such as icons, statues, scrolls and books looted from the treasuries of Indian kings, businessmen, temples, colleges and the common people. Highlighting the colonial nature of the British rule in India, John Sullivan, the president of Board of Revenue in Madras province had said, "Our system acts very much like a sponge, drawing up all the good things from the banks of Ganges and squeezing them down on the banks of Thames." When East India Company gained taxation rights in the Indian provinces, it dedicated a third of the revenue collected to fund the purchase of the Indian goods for Britain. This meant that the Britain was now buying Indian goods from Indian producers with Indian money. It was a grand-scale heist, looting of a whole different level entirely. India in the 18th century was a great manufacturing hub, and the products of Indian loom supplied the markets of Asia and Europe. But the East India Company and the British Parliament, following the selfish commercial policy, discouraged Indian manufacturers in order to encourage the manufacturers of England. Britain bought raw material from India at extremely low prices, processed them in their industries, and then exported the finished goods to India at much higher prices. India soon became subservient to the industries of Britain, forced only to grow raw material for the British factories. Thus, while Indian people were becoming poorer day by day, Britishers were tasting wealth and luxury. Another form of economic loot in colonial India was done by creating huge pay divide between British and Indian employees. The starting salary of a British employee in engineering service was about 60 times the average income of an Indian worker. Similar disparity was there in each department of the government. The British Viceroy received £25,000 a year and governors were paid £10,000. In 911, the Indian Army had about 4,000 British officers and practically no Indian. One Englishman had written that his father did not have a very successful career as a civil servant in India, but had 21 servants to start married life, 39 when he had 3 children, and 18 when living on his own. The 18 servants cost him less than 6% of his salary. All this money was collected from India, but was strengthening British economy. As a result of political, administrative and commercial connections established between India and England, the government of India had to make huge payments to the people of England. All these payments were known as home charges. Home charges were consisting of interest on public debt raised from England, annuities on account of railways and irrigation works, and payments to British employees employed in India, as well as pensions to retired employees worked in India. These home charges amounted to about £35 million annually. The British government also transferred its surplus revenues back to England. Since India consistently exported more than she imported in the second half of the 19th century and early 20th century, Britain used India's trade surplus to finance her own trade deficit with the rest of the world, to pay for her exports to India and for capital repayments in London. This represented a massive drain of India's wealth. Russia-born Paul Barron of Stanford University has calculated that 8% of India's GNP was transferred to Britain each year. The wealth of a country is not its GDP, which is the annual national income. The real wealth is the combined value of cash savings, gold, silver, precious stones, homes, buildings, factories, and so on. British rule forced Indians to unlock their savings. On 27 October 1931, the British government rammed through a series of measures that reduced gold and silver prices and raised interest rates in India. Impoverished Indians were selling their gold and silver savings, and the booty was transported to Britain. Marcus Wellington, the then Viceroy of India, had said, "Indians are disgorging gold," while the British leader Neville Chamberlain had remarked with great satisfaction, "The astonishing gold mine that we have discovered in India's hoards has put us in clover." One of the ships carrying this gold and silver was SS Garisoppa, which was sunk by a German U-boat in Atlantic in 1941. In 2011, when an American exploration company discovered the wreck, it was found to contain 200 tons of silver, worth nearly £150 million. In 1993, Belgian economist Paul Baruch presented a detailed study of the world economy. He explained that in the year 1750, China's share of global GDP was 33%, India's 24%, and the combined share of Britain and US was only 2%. His study showed that India had the largest economy on the planet for 1700 of the past 2000 years. From 1st century to 11th century, India had 32% share of the global GDP. During the second millennium, Islamic invasions disrupted economic activity, and India yielded the top spot to China. Still, India's share remained at 24% between 1000 to 1700 CE. But by 1947, when India became independent, the country's GDP comprised around only 3% of the global economy. Various studies have deduced that Britain drew out a total of $45 trillion from India during 200 years of colonial rule, which is more than 17 times the current GDP of UK. One can easily understand why British colonists referred to India as the jewel of the crown.